YouTube, welcome back to my channel. I am Taylor. This is my weekly show where I review a trade paperback. I let you know what I thought of it, and I usually give it away. Stay tuned to the end of the video to see how to win this one. And the winner of last week's video is Nev. I don't know, I'll put it in one of the corners with his comment basically saying he didn't want it. So, I don't know, hit me up and I'll get it out to you. You can judge for yourself, and you can see whether or not you think my reviews are crazy. And Navik, you probably do. But anyways, I'm going to move the mic because then it looks like I'm a real boy. Maybe. All right, so my review this week is of Die Volume 2, Split the Party. Split the Party. Written by Kieron Gillen, art by Stephanie Hans, and lettering by Clayton Coles. The lettering is mostly fine. It's a lot of lowercase, which I don't always love. And it's a little small for my old blind ass sometimes. And the white on black kind of gets a little bit into some user accessibility issues, at least for me. But it's better than the maroon on black that he sometimes does. They sometimes do. It's fine. It's not fantastic. I generally like their lettering better, but this'll do. The art by Stephanie Hans is pretty great. I've been going through this trying to figure out if it's digitally painted or not, and I think it is. I don't think it's traditionally painted, but I could be wrong. Everything about, like, just the general details and stuff kind of just strike me. And it's a little too clean and a little too put together, I think, for it to... I mean, I get it, trust me. Traditional painting and stuff can be all these things. But when you're under a comic book deadline and stuff, and things like that, and the lighting and stuff, and some of the brush effects, I think it's digital. Again, I could be wrong, but that's just my impression. Panels are usually pretty great. There's some where you're kind of like, what is... Maybe I won't move the mic there like a big boy. We'll try from there. There's some where you're like, I don't know what exactly is going on here. Help me, it hurts. But, for the most part, the transition from panel to panel is pretty good. The layout is also pretty typical. There's not a lot of funky layouts and not a lot of deviation, and that's okay. I appreciate creativity, and I appreciate the creative panel layout sometimes, but when you're trying to tell a story, sometimes it's best to stick within the constraints of storytelling norms, and that's kind of what this comic does. It picks up after Die Volume 1, and it continues on, as it were, because this is Die Volume 2. But yeah, Stephanie Hans' art is still pretty great. Characters are usually pretty easily recognizable. There's a couple minor instances where you're like, which one is that? But for the most part, it's pretty easy to tell who's doing what and who's saying what and whatnot. And the panel's guide, she does a good job of guiding your eye through the page. And when she does choose to do splash pages, or they together choose a writer and the artist, whatever, it's pretty effective. So, yeah, no complaints about the art. The writing, this is Kieron Gillen, and Kieron tends to write from what I've read of theirs. They've done like The Wicked and the Divine, The Young Avengers, some Star Wars stuff. The characters come across as cold to me, and that's, I think, on purpose in this, but like they always kind of do. The Young Avengers and Wicked and the Divine, both of which I've read a bit of, just like kind of, emotionally detached. Even though there's a lot of emotion in this book, it just doesn't ring as emotional, at least to me. And there's a lot of unlikable characters doing unlikable things and acting unlikably, which is part of the point of this. It's, characters that were kind of dicks get transported into a fantasy world where they act like dicks. And like they did this. I have to spoil a little bit of Volume 1. Volume 1, the characters had been transported as teenagers to a fantasy realm, and that's kind of like a standard fantasy trope where you're like, start in the real world, you're playing a role-playing game, it goes evil and wrong, and you end up in a fantasy land, and you conquer the land and become heroes. It deviates from the trope in that they're all kind of dicks, and they did some really pretty crappy things in this fantasy land. And then they went home, except for the creator of the land, one of their fellow 16-year-old friends, who stayed behind. And now this is volume 2. Then they went back. That was volume 1. Basically, they went back and they had to deal with started to deal with the repercussions of what they did the first time around. And this is more of that. It's a transitional volume. It's not filler, but it's dealing with the politics of the land and the more of the repercussions of their actions that they as teenagers and how it's affected them as grown-ups and how it's affected these characters and this world. And there's the debate as to whether or not this world is real. They don't really know, and so the reader doesn't really know. And the characters, when they were younger, especially, acted as if there are no consequences. So there's a freedom to their actions, but in that freedom, they behaved assholishly or dickishly, as it were. And so now they're back, and there's a lot of guilt and a lot of trauma that they've self-inflicted trauma, and that they're trying to deal with. And well, the choices they make, it's still. I'm not sure if these characters are ever going to have a redemptive arc. Let's put it that way. The politics and the intrigue are interesting, and they're. And you know it's done well enough, but what really interests me is the motivations behind the characters and like why they're choosing to do what they do, and Kieron's good at that. It's just kind of like you would expect people to act a little bit better than they do sometimes, and that's not really the case. Especially the main character Ash, who definitely is different than the real world counterpart. Well, is a freer version of the real world counterpart, and there's a lot of that in both volumes. It's like the freedom that it comes with not having real world problems or like the day-to-day problems and how these characters act. And there's different powers. There's a grief knight who gets stronger when he feels grief. There's the dictator who's Ash, who is Dominic Ash in the real world, but Ashley, a female in the fantasy world, and in the real world probably would be a female if she freed herself to do so. And then she has the power as a dictator to control other people, literally. And so it's a dark power, and it goes dark, and it's a dark book. Chuck, who's a fool, has to act a fool, and if he acts a fool, then great things can happen, or the unexpectedly good happens as long as he doesn't think about it too deeply, or delve into motivations, or deal with anything. And so there's that, which kind of makes an interesting character, because you can't grow if you can't deal with things, so you have to become, a fool. And then the grief knight I already spoke of, and there's Angela, who had a lot of trauma in the real world, gets some solace in this world, but then has to like deal with the fact that this solace is probably temporary and has to deal with that kind of grief. And then there's a godbinder, Isabel, whose power is to, bargain with gods and get them to do things in her favors. And she uses that in kind of a understandably asshole-ish way, but there's consequences to all of it. And then Saul, who's the Grandmaster, who is the other one that stayed behind. I don't want to spoil a whole lot of what's going on with Saul. And like they don't actually deal with Saul a whole lot in this volume. But it's an interesting thing, and I think down the line they will have to. So again, this is not the end of the story. It's the middle. Early middle? Beginning middle? I don't know. That's not correct English, but there's I think going to be 4 volumes to this total, and I think they're in the process of finishing up the last and final volume, is my understanding. So this is volume 2. I'm interested to see where volume 3 goes. Do I recommend this? Yes, but with some reservations. It's not a lighthearted romp, and it is playing with a lot of tropes as far as like video games and fantasy role-playing and stuff, but it's also twisting them into like an unfriendly kind of knot. Like you read this and you don't feel pleasant. It's not a pleasant feeling book. It's not a pleasant reading book. And reading it's not always a pleasant experience. It's kind of painful to read because you're dealing with such characters that you're like, that's not how I would act because I'm not that big a dick. So maybe you will feel good if you want something to make you feel better by reading about awfulness. So, I don't know. It's gorgeous. It's intriguing. And I'm interested to see where it goes. It's not quite as strong as the first volume, I don't think. But it's not bad. And I will keep it up. So, yeah, there's that. It's kind of a short review because it's a transitional thing. And if you can go back and watch my previous review, which I'll link to, if I remember to do that, I'll link it somewhere, maybe there. I don't know, whatever. And you can watch that review first and come back to this one. Or I know I put this at the end of the video, but I don't know. Thinking about these things ahead of time is hard, people. It is hard. And so, yeah, I have to think of a way to win this one. All right, let's see. Have you ever played a role-playing game? If so, what's your favorite? If not, what's... Yeah, if not, is there one you would try? So leave me a comment down below. And I'll give this away next week to somebody. So, Navik, again, hit me up and drop me your address, and I'll get it out to you. The Cowboy Ninja Viking from last week. And, as always, don't be a dick, even if you're trapped in a fantasy realm. Yeah. Well, that was an awkward see ya. Wow. My voice broke like I was 16 and trapped in a fantasy realm.